Well, hello, everybody, and I hope everybody had a great week. We got the legendary Joe Cardinal back in the hot seat, and he's going to kind of take the reins a little bit today, actually, the whole show, because he's going to talk about his vacation, which I think is pretty interesting, and he's got one of his buddies who I met once at a party that Joe had, which was a great party, but I was kind of disappointed because he says that he was going to get Julie Newmar and Raquel Welch to show up, and they never showed up, at least unless they came after I was here or I left.
Well, unfortunately, Tony, they got word that you were going to be there. So obviously.
Oh, you know what? And it didn't dawn on me because you know what? I got an anonymous text later that kind of said, meet me at the Drake Hotel. That must have been from one of them, and I blew it off. I didn't know. Okay. But anyway, yes, welcome everybody back. I see Nico just popped in.
Hey, what's up, guys?
We didn't think Nico was going to make it today, but it's great that Nico's here as well. So anyway, I'm going to shut up. I'm going to let Joe do some talking, and then he's going to introduce our special guest.
All right. Well, before we get started and get into the trip, I do want to make a plug for our membership site. There'll be links like in all of our videos below. You can find a link to join our membership site. I highly encourage anybody to do it. It's kind of the least you can do if you appreciate listening to this podcast or watching Tony's free content up on his YouTube, all the instruction, or if you just want to support our lineage of catch wrestling and keep it going. One of the easiest things you can do is join this monthly membership. It's just a simple, small fee. $5 donation. It's just like they say on PBS or Sally Struthers. It's just like the cup of coffee, right? You can go past one cup of coffee a month, but it means a lot to us that you care enough to support, and we'd appreciate it. So keep that in mind. Anyways.
Well, and tell them about the $10 a month option.
And yeah, if you actually, the next level up, if you do $10 a month, you actually have access to online instructional content that is not published previously before. So this is not things that you can find on YouTube or other sources. This is new content that we're producing at Tony's, current workout location. You've seen, he'll demonstrate things either with him or some of the guys who we train with. So you'll have access to that in addition. So yeah, obviously if you can do that, that's even better. And it's better for you because you get additional instruction. So, and of course, for those who are looking for, real training in person, there's a lot of, check Tony's website out. There's a lot of different options. Obviously the Cadillac version is the Tri-C, where you get basically unlimited access, and Tony does personalized training basically for a lifetime. He's going to be your coach for this. So that's obviously the ideal, but yeah, obviously do what you can. Not everybody can afford at the high end. Not everybody can buy videos, but I think everybody can join the membership program. So please consider it. So yeah, anyways, so Dwayne and I, we brought Dwayne. Dwayne's been my good buddy. I've known him. We've worked on and off together since the 90s. I've been very fortunate to have him back in my life. He's been all over the place. He's originally from Detroit. We won't hold that against him, but he did end up in Boston for a while. But then he came back to the Chicago area. And actually, I'm going to mute myself because I have a loud train coming. So I'm going to stop for a second.
Well, good. Remind me, because I want to ask Dwayne after we're all done with your portion of it, his take on Boston and Detroit, actually, because Detroit's probably very similar, maybe not as ethnic as Cleveland, my hometown, but as far as it being like an industrial city, I would think Cleveland has a lot more in common with the Detroit than it would with Boston, but I'd like to hear his take.
No, absolutely. I think there are a lot of similarities between Cleveland and Detroit, more so than with Detroit and Boston. Of course, we share the lake. It was that St. Clair or whatever, right? As the bird flies. Yeah. Which one is it? Huron. Yeah, St. Clair.
Lake Erie. Erie. Yes.
One of those. I get my lakes mixed up. All right. Yes. So there's close ties, manufacturing towns, of course. And the times I visited Cleveland, because I had an uncle who lived, like my grandmother's brother lived to like 113 years old. So we would, we'd go there because, it was like, well, this might be the last time we see uncle, right? So yeah, I've been to Cleveland a few times, and it felt a lot like Detroit anyway. So and in Boston.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm glad to have you here.
Yeah. And but definitely, Boston is a sort of a different place than Cleveland or Detroit. It's more like an academic town, if you will, right? Because there's a lot of like those universities there. Like I think like a huge portion of the population in Boston are like students or people that to deal with with school or whatever. So it's not quite as what do I want to say? I don't know. It's not quite as cool as Cleveland and Detroit to me.
There you go.
But it's interesting in its own way, right? So, yeah.
Cool.
But I'm glad to be back in Chicago and back in touch with Joe. So thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
Well, I've still got some background noise going, but I don't think it's too bad at the moment. But yeah, so, I was able to sucker Dwayne into going into a 2-week vacation with me out east to a survival school, specifically the Tom Brown Nature Tracking and Survival School is the name. And it's a outdoor wilderness skills school that has been there or in that general vicinity for over 40 years, is my understanding. So this is something that started back in the 70s in the outdoor, outdoorsy survival kind of world. This Tom Brown is a pretty big personality, I think, because he's just been around for so long. He's written 18 books, I believe. If you've seen the movie, there's a movie, The Hunted, with Tommy Lee Jones and Benicio del Toro. That is loosely based on, him as a character in one of his stories, but he's most famous for being a tracker. So his story is that he grew up, one of his neighborhood friends was of Native American ancestry, and his grandfather was an Apache tracker. And so they just spent all their time growing up learning these primitive skills, and specifically with a focus on tracking. And so he's helped the police and helped the authorities find people, recover people in the wilderness. And it just kind of grew his reputation. And from that, he decided to make a school for that. And like I said, he's been doing it for years and years. I've been aware of the school probably since the 80s. One of the guys I trained Muay Thai with back in the 80s had gone and had kind of talked up the school. And so it was one of those things always in the back of my mind that I always wanted to try and do. But, for various reasons, a family, what have you, and also honestly, fear a little bit. I didn't do it. I kept procrastinating and not doing it because, I'm a city boy, much like at least most of us on this podcast. I grew up very urban. Although it's interesting because, like, for me, even though I grew up, in Chicago, I grew up a couple blocks. I was just realizing this when I was there. I grew up a couple blocks from the Chicago River. And so even though I was in a very urban environment, as a kid, I would often go exploring right by the river. So it's a little strip of land, maybe but it extended the whole length of the river. And I would just, spend my free time in the summers, just kind of like, I don't know, pretending I was in the army or whatever, and just hanging out there. So I think, even for city kids, I think a lot of them, there is that kind of urge to get out into nature, I think there is a thing for that. And so anyways, the long story short, this is the second time I've been to the school. 4 years ago, I went to what they call their standard class, which is all their fundamental skills that they want you to learn. This time I decided to go and do 2 weeks. So when I went back in 2017, you're basically camping out that whole time, which for me would have been the longest I've ever spent, out of doors, living in a tent. I've done some weekends a couple times as a kid with some friends of the family, but nothing where it was just, that long of a stretch. And so I wanted to push that. I want to see, hey, can I do this for 2 weeks? Because there's, like, for me, the first week, I could kind of stretch how long I could go with, like, not clean clothes, but 2 weeks, there's only so much you can pack, so I knew this was going to be a new challenge for me. And now, Dwayne, you have a background, you were in the Army, so this is not completely foreign to you. You've definitely spent some times in your youth in the woods, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Mostly in the woods in Oklahoma and Alaska, but I wouldn't say the woods of Oklahoma is not where Fort Sill is. There's not a lot of woods like in the traditional sense, but yeah, it's definitely outside. And then Alaska, of course, it's like, you know, a lot of woods. In fact, I think that's where the Smurfs live, right? Because they're like mushrooms, you know, they come up to your knee or whatever. So yes, to answer your question, yeah, it was not foreign. Yeah.
Did this trapper mention a guy by the name of Mike Hanak?
I don't remember that name.
Okay,
Is that
because
a-
he's a guy that was great martial artist that I knew. I've lost touch, but he was into the tracking thing and he studied with some legendary tracker. So I'm assuming it's got to be this guy.
It sounds like it, because the fact that this guy's been around so long, it seems like a lot of people who are involved in like wilderness, primitive skills, survival, and tracking specifically trace the roots back to this guy. So it'd be very interesting. I should look him up when, you know, after the show, I'll look up his name, because I bet you that there's a connection there. And that's one of the fascinating things about this, is that he's been around for so long and teaching that now he's got people who are second or third generation into this. So like there's one instructor who was there in 2017, his name was Kyle, but he was considered a tracker baby. His mother was pregnant with him when she was taking the classes. And so they actually do have classes for, you know, it's formatted differently when you're an adult. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit more, you know, mature, but they actually have classes for all ages. So they have like programs that they have for kids and families and things like that. And so there's some kids who have literally grown up learning these skills. So by the time they reach, you know, like 18 and are able to do it, they've already got a lot of these fundamental skills of, you know, fire making and whatnot. They've already got it down. They got it, and they've experienced a lot of the tracking. But it is a fascinating aspect, and it's kind of something, it's kind of a whole other aspect to me of self-defense and self-protection that we really haven't touched on here on this show. But as far as, you know, we often talk about with self-defense, you know, oh, this could never happen to me, or I live in a safe neighborhood. But the reality is it can always happen. You never know. You're going to end up in a situation where you might have to protect yourself. And it's a lot like this too, where, you know, gosh, my car could break down. You know, I'm going on a long road trip and I end up somewhere where I may have to spend the night alone, or worse, you know, even longer. And, you know, am I comfortable in that scenario? Do I have the skills to do that? So I definitely think, and it's interesting to me, the parallels, the overlaps. There's a lot of things that they talk about that we've talked about. One of the big things is awareness, keeping your awareness about you. And they're very much into, you know, now they don't only do it for like survival, but also part of what one of their ethics, and I'll kind of, this is a digression, but they feel that learning these skills and developing this and being comfortable is really the pathway to getting closer to nature. So a lot of people, I think there's like two approaches, what I've seen looking online, to kind of survival and wilderness skills. And some are strictly about kind of the modern approach. You know, what can I pack in my backpack? Do I have a lighter? Do I have a ferro rod? Do I have the cordage? Do I, you know, have basically like a well-equipped bug out bag with me? So if in case I am in an emergency, you know, do I know how to use those? Do I know how to put up a tarp for a tent? And all those things are very valid and useful. But it kind of reminds me of when you and I have talked about like self-defense. There are some people like, hey, I just got concealed carry. I don't need to know how to use my bare hands. You know, if I get into any trouble, I've got my either my knife or my gun. I have my tools. But one of our ethics is, well, you know, what if someone breaks into the house and I'm in the shower? You know, I need to also be a weapon myself. I need to be able to have the skills when I don't have the tools. And that's kind of what some of what the approach is here. You know, I may not have, you know, in a worst case scenario, I need to know what I can do with as few tools as possible. And so it's a slightly different approach in that regard. So I think they're both valid. I think you have to learn both. It's a whole other world to explore. So much like martial arts, it's like a lifetime of learning. And honestly, I feel everybody could benefit from this, at least doing the beginner thing. But I don't know, Dwayne, what were your thoughts, initial impressions and things going there? What expectations did you have?
Well, I tried to go without having a bias of, I was a soldier, but it was a long time ago, right? So I tried to, go with an open mind rather than saying, well, I know a lot of this stuff, or I've done a lot of this stuff already. Um, and I'm glad I did, because while there is some overlap, there is not really a lot of overlap. And what I mean by that is, you don't realize it until you are stripped of those tools. Because we always had fire making. That was always, you took it for granted, right? We had matches and lighters and whatever, matches that would work underwater, whatever, they get wet or whatever, and they still will work or whatever. So, and we always had shelter, at least a sleeping bag or whatever, and a poncho or whatever. So, but when you like go to the survival class and you're stripped of all those things, it becomes really apparent that you're kind of really not prepared. They're not even in the same, they're sort of in the ballpark, but they're not the same. And so the only thing that I took from being a soldier to this survival class is like one of those things I had a first sergeant used to say, the key to being a good soldier was just becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? And so that's the only thing I brought, and it was uncomfortable for those 2 weeks, right? Definitely. But yeah, that was an eye opener, and pertaining to taking care of yourself and being able to defend yourself. The other eye opener is the voice in my head still thinks he's a soldier, but I let my fitness go. And anybody that's listening to this podcast or watching us or whatever, don't do that, right? Try your best to stay fit, because that was a struggle for me. And that is the biggest takeaway for me, Joe, is that, because you can't, if your fitness isn't at a level to sustain this sort of physical activity, then it makes you, I don't know what it is, but you become more vulnerable, right? To either the environment or to whatever, like, somebody in your house when you get out of the shower or whatever, right? If you don't maintain it. I have unfortunately let my fitness get to a point where that those 2 weeks were a real struggle. And so I didn't get out of it everything that I could have. So that is the biggest takeaway I took home from that is like, well, you know what? I need to be on a diet, right? Because you can't exercise the way I diet. Because Joe, I still go to the gym or whatever, but I eat crazy or whatever. I know I'm getting off topic here, probably, and ranting or whatever going off on.
No, this show is all about ranting, so keep going.
All right. So, but if I think that is probably the base of all the things that we're talking about here, right? Is a fitness level, right? You need to be able to, hold yourself up or lift yourself up or do a push-up or whatever, you know what I mean? So, and be able to have some fitness to get through those. Because like for instance, when we went to the marshlands or whatever to get the tall grass for the mats or whatever, was that like a 7-mile round trip or whatever? And that was taxing, right? So you never know when you're going to be able to need to be able to move out of the way or get out of the way or run away from danger, right? Because I'm at that point now where that's my first mode of self-defense is I'm wanting to get out of the area or whatever, right? And need to have some fitness for that. So anyway, I'll stop there.
Well, that goes back to, again, to the kind of reoccurring themes. Fitness in general for life, no matter what you're doing, your fitness is going to improve that quality, your ability to do those things or enjoy those things too, and those 2 weeks were tough, but it's going to be tougher if you're struggling with other things that you don't have to be, and even some of that was like, for some people was addiction, right? Like some people was cigarettes and coffee. Now they did provide, there was a place where you could smoke and they did provide coffee every morning, but it's a harsh reminder that if all of a sudden you had to go 72 hours without that stuff, how would you be operating? That's going to weigh on you, you know, it's going to make a tough situation tougher. And it's the same thing with, with the fitness thing where, why make it harder on yourself? Besides just general health and longevity, situations like that, it's only going to make it worse. And like, you know, we often talk about our, you know, our fighting techniques. You're not really going to be able to apply them. You may know a lot, but, you know, in a fight, you're going to gasp before you can even apply those techniques. You know, you need they go hand in hand. And so absolutely that is a thing. I'll say this though, that, you know, one of the things that kept me from going to this earlier was intimidation. Again, not having any experience camping and not knowing how hardcore it was going to be. I mean, because really like a true survival situation is very intense. And that was not what this is. This is definitely a safe environment to learn skills. I mean, you are sleeping out in a tent, you are using porta potties, you know. Actually, I was thinking about Rick Solo a couple of times. He was a guy we had on our podcast before, but do you remember, Tony, when he said, "Hey, have you ever washed your clothes in the bucket?" when he was in Thailand training? I was like, now I have. I've washed my clothes in the bucket.
Now, let me ask a quick question before I forget here, because it's on what you just said. You had porta potties, you slept in tents. Does he offer an even more advanced course where you don't even have a tent, where you don't have porta potties, where you are really in the woods with no tools, with nothing? Because I'd like to know if he offers something like that.
I think he does at the advanced levels. So there's at least 2 more basic levels above us. So there's 4 like fundamental classes. There's the standard, the advanced standard, and then he has one that's focused on like awareness and tracking. And then he goes into the scout level. And that one is kind of what they consider their, you know, I don't know if that would be considered black belt or blue belt equivalent, but it means you have a competency and you are living outdoors. And again, they don't give a lot of details for that. So some of the way the school works is that they, you know, some of the things, they don't want you to necessarily be prepared for. They want you to experience it, to feel how is it to go through that, you know, whether it's a certain kind of deprivation or like the long walk we had. If you're not, because, you know, survival situations, you know, you're not always going to be ready for everything, and how you psychologically are you going to respond to that? So part of that is learning yourself. So I won't talk about everything in the classes because I think they you know, some stuff they want to kind of keep like that. But anyways, to your question, yes, some of the advanced students get to that level. I'd have to look over but it's definitely like a few more courses out. Like I would not be ready for that. So this class is still what I would consider like going into the shallow end of the pool, or, you know, there's definitely a lot of what I would consider training wheels, which you need. You're not going to, you know, if you're brand new to these things. Now, there's a wide range of people. People are already outdoorsmen who come to this, who already are familiar with some things. But like I said, I still had a knife that I could work with, you know. Now, at one point we did work with flaking rocks and making stone tools. But obviously that's that's a much bigger handicap than having a good steel knife to make your fire kit or make your traps and things like that. So this is definitely, and that's, I guess, one of the messages I want to convey to people who are maybe considering this, is that you are not being thrown out into the wild. You know, you do have some, like I said, you're easing into this. You are living in a tent. Food is provided for you. You're not foraging and having to kill your own food, you know, although they start to teach you how to do that, how to hunt, how to trap. Those are things, but there's no way. Well, I shouldn't say there's no way. It'd be very difficult for a beginner to pull those off, you know. So yeah, this is definitely, and actually there's a lot of inspirational things out there too. There's people who of all ages. I mean, this was adults, but that meant anybody 18 and over. So there was a lady there in her 80s who was doing this. Yeah, I mean, she was a character, you know. But she was there she actually was staying longer than us because they have 3-week courses back to back. Now, she didn't push herself like everybody, but I wouldn't expect her to. She was still getting things out of it, you know, and this is her way of getting, you know, out of the grind, getting out back to nature and camping and learning some things. So it was impressive. There was a mother-daughter combination. They were from Taiwan. Their English wasn't that great. I mean, I was thinking about how much courage that would take for me to go, like if I had a reverse roles and if I had to fly to Taiwan or some language or some country where the language wasn't my first language, to like learn survival skills. I mean, that was impressive. and they were working really hard at the skills. So I mean, I think they understood English, but they definitely had trouble communicating verbally sometimes. But it was impressive that people were really coming from all over the world. We had people obviously from close places like Canada. One guy was from Puerto Rico. I mean, it's really interesting, this community, how it's really kind of disseminated across the globe and how people come to this place. It's kind of a mecca for training for it. But yeah, ultimately the goal is to get to that point where, you're going in there with next to nothing, maybe just the clothes on your back. They do start to teach you, I mean, sometimes they introduce you to topics that's like, okay, some things are you do like in the first, they give you, here's your priorities in the first 24 hours. Okay. And I can kind of share that. They talk about what they call the sacred order. And they just keep that in mind is, first things is shelter. You need shelter. You can get hypothermia. If you try to, if the woods go down to 40 degrees at night and you're sleeping on the ground without shelter, you're gonna put yourself at grave danger. So that's your number one need, first and foremost. And then after that, it's water. Your body needs water, and water is a really tough one. I mean, we could go off on a long digression on that, but in the modern world, so back in the day, in primitive days, they had to worry about things like bacterial infection and particulates in water. So you could clear that by boiling. But in the modern era, so much of our water is tainted by chemicals and things. And you can never 100% know that your water is safe. So doing that in a primitive fashion is very difficult. So one of our prime needs actually now in the modern era is much harder than it was, back for frontiersmen and things like that. So that's a difficult one. So after shelter, water comes fire, and partially because it's so tied with water is that ideally if you can get fire going, besides giving yourself heat, and you can help purify the water a little bit if you're boiling it, able to boil water. And then lastly, food. And they spell this out because a lot of people, I think, instinctively, or they think food is your first priority. Oh my God, if I'm not going to be able to eat in the next 24 hours, I'm going to be starving or whatever. And literally, it's good to keep in mind that is not high on your priority lists. I mean, yeah, you'll be hungry, but you can go 30 days, in a fast if you need to. I mean, and so it's kind of like keep your priorities. First and foremost, you need to get warm, and so that first 24 hours, the kind of advice is you need to start having the right mental attitude, relaxing, like using your awareness to start to see what resources are around you, because the first thing you're going to want to do is gather debris, because you're going to need to make at a minimum a big pile of debris that you can sleep in that'll keep you off the ground and keep you insulated. It may not be comfortable, it may not be a tent in a sleeping bag, but you just can't lay on the ground because you'll just conduct all this heat away from your body, so number one. And so you can then use that debris that you're gathering, like just a huge pile of leaves, if you can imagine this, and whatever you can gather. And obviously you have to be careful for things like poison ivy. So you got to be kind of literate about your plants too, and know what can be bad. But ultimately you'll use that debris to make a more long-term shelter. So that's kind of like your first thing. And while you're doing that, you kind of have to keep an open mind. It's like, well, are there rocks that I look like I could maybe smash and break and get a sharp edge on? Like if I don't have a knife, I've got to be looking for a lot of things like that. Are there edible plants? You have to study plants. Are there things that I could be snacking on? And also looking for water sources. So there's a lot in that first 24 hours. If you're realizing, hey, I might be stuck here, I have to start doing that. And then it kind of evolves from there. Okay, what if it's going to be, 72 hours? How far along should I be? Should I have my shelter put together? I'll post some pictures. I've actually posted to my Instagram site, but I'll do it to yours as well, Tony, when we post this the podcast. But we actually, Dwayne and I, we built a debris hut, which is kind of like I don't know, like kind of a horizontal teepee frame. It's a triangle, but it's low to the ground because you don't want a lot of height. You want to conserve heat, and you make this frame out of branches that you're able to either break over or bend, and it's long enough for your body to lay in. And you kind of make kind of, if you will, like a debris sleeping bag for yourself, where you have room where you can scoot in and kind of make a mattress of debris to keep yourself off the ground, but also have a huge mound of debris over it. So in case it rains, it won't leak through. So that's kind of like your second term goal, to do that. But you're also, like I said, you're looking for things that you can use for tools. They had us work on finding sticks that are like clubs that you could use to throw at like small game to get animals if you needed to. I'm trying to think of some other things. What are some other things, Dwayne, that they had us working on early on? Do you remember?
Yeah, the debris hut. But I just wanted to say, before this, to me, this is why it all went back to number one for me was fitness, because everything that you're talking about is expending energy or whatever. And I remember just being gassed when we were just finding the stuff for the debris hut. But yeah, but you know, it's that sort of awareness about your environment, for like you were saying, like you know, like while you're doing like for instance, while you're gathering the debris for the debris hut, you need to be aware with what they call wide angle vision or whatever, so you can notice things that you might need later and you come back and get them. Like for instance, things you can make tools with, stones, straight, you know, bushes that have straight what do we call it, Joe? They have straight stems and branches or whatever that you can use to make your fire kit with. Those things. But like just listening to you talk about that, I just was reminiscing, you know, I took a lot of my cues from you because I wanted to like sit down a lot, right? You know, it was like, man, this is not good. I'm like, because you know, I'm like, I'm sucking wind here or whatever, right? But you know, but it's good to have a buddy, right? Because I was like, well, if Joe can do it, I can do it. But at the end of the day, I was suffering, I was hurting. So I know I said the fitness thing a lot, but I just want everybody to understand. Start doing some jumping jacks and push-ups or whatever you got to do, walk or whatever, because it's real. The struggle is real. If you don't have a friend with you like Joe or whatever, and you out somewhere by yourself, I mean, all of those things are expending calories. Luckily, I have a lot of calories stored to expend, but I still, right, you know, so fitness, please. Anybody listening, please take that. I mean, I'm sure people who listen to you guys, to Tony and you guys, already know about that, but this is for the people who come by chance by your video, but just please take that seriously, because that is like the foundation of staying alive, either in the woods or in the neighborhood, I think.
What about, Joe, protecting yourself from animals, wolves or bears, or, I mean, you know, was that touched upon?
Not so much. Obviously, yeah, if you're in the area where, I mean, like certain areas out west, you know, or northwest where you're going to run into grizzly bears or whatever, you definitely need to be paying attention to signs like that. Obviously, if you're coming across tracks, you know, or large, you know, animal droppings or things like that. But no, I mean, fire is a big thing, smoke. The other thing is just like, you know, obviously like small thing, we generally think, oh, that wolves or bears, but you also have to keep an eye on yourself for small things like ticks, you know,
or snakes and shit.
Yeah, we had, how many snakes did we see in the camp? There was a few, you know. And you know, so like one of the things they recommend is, so you make this debris hut, and you obviously have to be careful as you're reaching around and grabbing stuff like that. But using the smoke from your fire, you know, you got to be careful you don't catch anything on fire, but you can smoke things. You know, animals definitely like to, you know, don't want to be around the smell of smoke. You know, that definitely is a deterrent for pests and things like that. But yeah, it's definitely a possible risk out there. We came in close contact with a couple snakes a couple times.
Forgot about
Did you guys have
makers,
to
right?
camp out?
So we were camping the whole time in our tent.
So you didn't have to actually sleep in your custom built shelter.
Right. So it's kind of, well, it's kind of optional. So week 2, so they introduce you how to build the shelter in the first week. Week 2, so if you go on to week 2, then it's like, okay, now everybody's building their own shelter, and ideally we want you all using it at least one night. So there's a lot of people, like for people, obviously that's definitely a milestone for a lot of people to sleep in that.
Did you do that, Joe?
I did, yes, actually.
So
Yeah.
how was that sleeping in your homemade shelter?
Well, it's interesting because many people had a wide variety of experiences. For some people, like they were the first guy to do it. So the first week they have the breeze shelter. They kind of show you in rapid succession, because a lot of people are working on it. This is how you want to build it. And they said like, okay, who volunteers to sleep in it the first night? And it's like one of those things in the Stooges where like all the volunteers take one step, or volunteers take step, and everybody takes a step backwards, you know, no one wants to do it. But there was that kind of moment of hesitation. And then there was this older guy, his name was Sweeney, and he ended up being a super cool guy, but he's just like, you know, F it, I'm going to do it. And he raised his hand. And so he slept in it that night. And it was very transformative for him, because he did something that he was afraid of. you know, because everybody had the same thought. It's like, oh, great, I'm going to be like stuck with pine needles and bugs are going to be on me and it's going to be cold. You know, you don't, it's the unknown. It's the fear of the unknown. And he did it, you know, and made it to the morning, and it was transformative to him. He like was a different guy afterwards. I mean, that's the interesting thing is you see that. I've saw that more than a couple times for people at this camp. I'll get back to the debris thing in a second, but there was, to me, it was very inspirational. Just there was this one girl, Michelle, and I came back into, there's like a camp area where everybody's practicing their skills. And I came back and she was basically on her hands and knees, almost looking like she was praying, and she was crying because she had just lit her first fire. You know, she did something she didn't think was possible. She made, you know, a friction fire. And it was kind of cool to see when people do things that they didn't think they were able to do and cross that threshold, how much an impact that can have on them. I talked to her, and actually, this is something she had been interested in her whole life. And when she finally got old enough, she went and did the class. And so this was a long time coming for her, that experience. There was a book called Hatchet, which a lot of kids have to read in school nowadays. Like my son, Ben, had to read it.
I had to read it.
Did you read it?
Yeah, it was awesome. I loved it.
Yeah, but I mean, that book, like, it inspired a lot of people to get out into nature and do things. And she was one of those. She's like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to learn how to do this for real. And so that book inspired her as a kid. And now as a young adult, she went out and started doing the skills. So her whole life, this had been an interest of hers. And when she crossed that milestone of lighting a fire without matches, she was just elated. So, but anyways,
would some of this be covered in Boy Scouts? Because I was never a scout. So, I mean, you guys, were you scouts?
I wasn't.
I was not.
Okay,
yeah,
so-
I wasn't either. And it's interesting because I think the Boy Scouts have changed over time. I bet you the early Scouts, yes. And my understanding is the very first Boy Scouts manual has a lot of good, like from the early 1900s manual has a lot of good information like this. But like Haley's fiance, my daughter's fiance, he's an Eagle Scout. So like, he's like, you know, whatever, a super level Boy Scout.
Yeah.
But he never learned to make friction fire. You know, when I talked to him, it's like, oh, they didn't have you do that? Because to me, that would seem to be fundamental. But I think the Boy Scouts have kind of expanded their definition. I don't know it exactly because I'm not a scout, but, you know, like I did it a little bit with Ben, and they had things like, you know, pine derbies where they race their cars. So it's partially outdoorsy, but it's also, I don't know, trying to make them better citizens and things like that. So I don't know if they focus on the primitive skills as much as I would expect them to. But yeah, and I'm knocking it. I think it has its own value, and there's some scouts who are really good at this stuff, but I definitely don't know if their focus is this kind of stuff. It's just like kind of when you find out that it's not happening in the Army as much as you'd think. But again, you know, they have all the modern tools. You're not going to spend a lot of time doing something that is maybe a, you know, 1 in, you know, 1,000 chance of happening to you. You know, you're going to focus on what the most immediate needs are, you know. So, and there were some veterans there too. There was a lot of veterans. You know, I said this school casts a wide net of people of different interests. Like I said, there's people who are straight up hippies. You know, they wanted to get closer to nature, you know, and that's why they were there. But then there were people who were former military people, and their stories were kind of inspirational too. One of the guys we talked to, he was one of the instructors. He was one of my favorites, Bill, because in some ways he was just so genuine, you know, because the main guy, he's kind of, I don't know, like some of the stories he says, what he can track and what he can do sometimes seems impossible. It's like, there's no way. And then this guy, Bill, came to actually teach some of the specific tracking things. Now, tracking, a high level of tracking, you don't necessarily need for a simple, like 24, 72 hour survival thing, but it's very core to their, I don't know, their ethic or their belief that learning to track is kind of tuning into nature a little bit more, because you're observing everything. You're really trying to pay attention to all the details that are going on. So they introduced that. They used to only introduce that in advanced classes, but they've now switched to giving you a lot of it right away. I'm going to pause real quick. I'm going to mute for a second. Hold on.
So Dwayne, was there like a list of tools that were required you to bring to the camp, or how did that work out?
Well, I think they, one of the tools was like a 3-inch knife. That was like a full tanning knife or whatever, because we had to do a lot of carving. For instance, like we had to carve spoons and make a bowl to eat. And,
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. I think that was pretty much the only tool that I remember requirement that they had.
Do you have to bring like a
So
tent and a poncho and sleeping
yeah,
bag, stuff
yeah, I don't think you had to, but we
like
did.
that?
Yeah, because there were some people who, they only use a blanket, for instance, or whatever. They do whatever the Ranger burrito or whatever, where they just wrap themselves in a blanket. But Joe and I, we had a tent. And but and you probably should bring bug spray, but um but those are only like requirements I remember. And I was gonna talk about when Joe was saying like the tracking of animals or whatever, and like when Tony was talking about protecting yourself from bigger animals or whatever, that was one of those contrast things between this class and what I learned in the Army. This class we took, the message is to like make a small noise in nature. You don't want to disrupt it. You want to move about in nature without, almost silently. Whereas in the Army, if you notice, like, and I'll give you a personal story. If you notice these sort of bear tracks, I was in Alaska, so of course bear was always on everybody's mind. The job I had required proficiency in land navigation, so they took us to McKinley, or whatever McKinley's called now, I'm not sure. And they told us there were no bears, so we went on this land navigation contest for this weekend. And I remember making my way back, and I come across bear prints, bear scat, and you could smell the bear. And then we were taught you want to make as big an interruption in nature as you can, because you don't want to sneak up on something like a bear or whatever, right? So I remember I started singing and making my way, trying not. But anyway, someone in front of me came across this bear and he was attacked. Yeah, so it was serious. It's a serious thing, So on my way back, I saw the medevac chopper come, and he was mauled by the bear, and I don't know, 100 stitches in his head and back, and he survived. But that's a contrast between, like, if you wanted to do like what they taught us in the Army and then what we learned in this class. So you can take that for what it's worth, but if you see the signs of something that can harm you or be of danger to you, you want to leave the area as loudly as possible, because you don't want to startle something like a bear.
So did he run into the bear trying to escape your singing?
Maybe.
So do you think he snuck up on the bear? I mean, if he was following the orders, being loud and everything,
I don't think he saw it. I don't think, I think
did he do anything different, or was he just the lucky one? So he was believing what was told to him, that there was no bears.
Absolutely right. They told us
that's
that the
wrong.
area was clear, right? And I think maybe the way he came in to the area, he didn't see. I came in a different way, and I saw the signs that there was a bear there. He may not have seen those signs and came upon the bear, because the woods were really thick in that area or whatever, so you really can't see ahead. And I just happened to be lucky enough to come upon the tracks and the signs that the bear was there.
So what did they tell you? Like, if a bear actually attacks you, how did they tell you to handle that? I mean, obviously you guys probably had weapons, right?
We were not issued weapons for this exercise. That was that was the other, yeah. So the normal thing with they would tell us for the bear thing is to get on the ground and on your stomach. You don't want your vital areas exposed, and then sort of shell up, and let the bear attack you, which is what he did, because it hit the back of his skull. But that's where he had the most stitches, was on his skull and on his rear end, because the bear picked him up by his butt and shook him around. So he did follow that training, that sort of advice that we had. But yeah,
So
really
that
not
probably
much
saved his life.
It did. It did definitely save his life. Yeah.
Yeah, that's yeah, well, and it harks back to like what I teach, actual real urban self-defense. You have to be prepared for anything. I'm not going to delve into this, but I saw one of the most ridiculous videos I ever saw. What was today? Sunday, Monday, Saturday night, by a Navy SEAL, right? Self-defense stuff and against kidnappings and just ridiculous things that he was discussing. And there are right ways of approaching things and not so right ways of approaching things. Now, apparently, what you were told about the bear was for this guy the right approach. But yeah, it's interesting because what I would like to know eventually, if you guys ever continue with the training, is when you don't have these implements, like you guys, like you just said, Dwayne, you didn't have a gun, right? So everybody would say, oh, he's in the Army, shoot the bear. Well, you don't have a gun. That's what we need to get to. Some of the stuff, like I said, the SEAL was talking about was like preposterous. Okay. He covered nothing about being completely without implements, right? Which is, let's face it, the majority of people that are going to get involved in either a wilderness survival thing or an urban survival thing, you just may not have the tools, right? This may be your only tool, your body, what you have on you, and your brain. And I think that's what a lot of people really need to deal with. Get to that level.
Yeah, and to that point, part of the training that we took in the survival class, they mentioned more than 24 times about being aware of your surroundings. And they would say, like, most people have their head at a 45-degree angle and they're looking at the ground and not even aware where they're going. They're just in a hurry to get to the next meeting or to get to wherever. And really, you're vulnerable then, right? Because a lot of situations probably could be avoided if you had your head up and you were paying attention, right? And because there's signs that, I shouldn't go this way, or like, I was telling Joe yesterday, like, like you walk down a street or whatever, and you see a bunch of people across the street, and as you're coming up the block, and then some people peel off and come across to the same side as you, whatever, then I just told him, I was like, I turned the next corner. I didn't even go down that block. You know what I mean? But like, if I had not been paying attention, then I might have came into some trouble, offered or whatever, $20 I had carrying on my pocket or whatever. But so that is a lesson that I took back, because I noticed that I don't always have my head up when I'm walking around, especially in my own neighborhood. I feel safe. And earlier Joe was saying, these things don't happen in my neighborhood. Well, yeah, they could,
Yeah, that's the biggest thing. Yeah, is the awareness. Now, being aware is, may not, it's not an elixir. It may not prevent the inevitable, but it sure helps. So, you have, even if it's a matter of even mere seconds, to mentally prepare to like get your head in the game, so you take the shock out of it, right? So especially in my personal experience, a couple of times I was shocked. Okay, like Joe knows where I lived. I showed him. I turned the corner. There was a building on the corner of a grocery store, and I got stabbed immediately. I never saw it coming. And then there were other times where I saw the mess that I was getting myself into, and that mentally prepared me for, it's kind of like they say, like sometimes in an accident or something, it seems like time slows down. It's a weird experience, and it's not metaphysical really, but sometimes when you see what's happening, your perception kind of, all of a sudden, all these ideas start coming into your head if you're prepared for them, and if you've practiced them. So like in your guys' case, I would think if you always practice all of the stuff that Tom Brown taught you in the 2 weeks, it'll become second nature, man. It'll be like automatic. And the next thing you know, hey, I'm ready for the next advanced class.
Absolutely. Hopefully that's the goal, and I was thinking about one of the things we talked about too, is that, it maybe took them an hour or 90 minutes or whatever to show us a skill. But it's just like any skill. It's going to take me, maybe 100 hours to master it where I'm comfortable, and there's always new challenges you can do. Like they talked about, so there were people there who already could make fire. There's a certain, one of the first things they teach you is what's called a bow drill. And that's one of them kind of like go-to if you don't have matches to try and make that. But like, okay, let's say you're good at doing it with your right hand for it. Do it with your other hand. What if your arm was injured? Hey, what if it's raining out? So like one of the instructors said, yeah, when I came here, I knew how to do this. So they said, okay, go jump there's this really cool swimming area they have actually. And they said, okay, go take a swim with your kit, come back. Now see if you can make a fire, or do it blindfolded, let's say. So there's always, because maybe you have to do it at night, or maybe, whatever, low visibility. So, but yeah, I mean, there's, the one thing I'll say is that the 2 weeks of classes, there were dozens and dozens of skills. We just scratched the surface of practicing them. This really is, this is going to take a lot of hours and dedication to hone those skills. It's not something, I mean, it's better to be forewarned and have an idea of what I need to do, so I'm not completely clueless, but it's definitely, I still got a long way to go before I would feel like, oh yeah, I belong out here. Well, in some ways it's just like martial arts. I mean, it's kind of a lifetime dedication to developing these things. This is just a new other aspect to it of like, okay, these are some more skills I have to work.
But you got the right attitude. See, a lot of times people will go with the martial arts, or I'm sure other things, they'll go to a seminar, a one-day seminar or something, and then they expect everything they were shown in the seminar to just magically work. They don't get it that it takes, thousands and thousands of hours of practice and repetition, and the seminar itself, like this 2-week program that you went through, cannot cover every scenario. Okay. But I bet you if you, let's say, lived with the guy and trained with him full time for 2 years and picked his brain over all the knowledge, you'd be great, but I think sometimes expectations for people are, not realistic. But this guy sounds like he's got a really great program. I mean, that's just awesome. You should put a link and stuff in the description here for people to check him out.
Oh, I will for sure. That's a great idea for sure. And
Yeah.
I highly recommend it, honestly. I mean, you can go for various reasons. I think obviously the most important is functional safety skills for wilderness skills, but even just to get out into the woods, get a little bit closer to nature, be thinking about those things. I mean, there's just a lot of benefits. I was thinking about all my friends and families, and there's so much, each person I could see getting different benefits from it. They might like one aspect more than another, some people are just, and that was kind of the other thing that was kind of cool to see, is that because this school has been around for so long, he's now got this cadre of teachers who they start to specialize. Like we met one guy who was an expert at friction fire. So like he gave us, we were very fortunate. So the thing is,
why don't you tell us where this is located?
So this is in New Jersey. So it's in New Jersey in the Pine Barrens. So it's on the East Coast, but there are like affiliated schools. So he does, have people who have trained with him who are on other aspects, other areas of the country, but that place specifically is there. And so a lot of good people end up coming there. And what's interesting too, is a lot of instructors will come back and they'll just volunteer, because there's people like they're helping out, just like giving there's like the main instructors who are giving, but there's also people who just it's a community of people. So they'll have people who just come in, and just want to help out, and maybe they'll help with the kitchen or whatever, or help with, pumping water, but then they'll also give you a little advice, like there was a guy who worked the kitchen, an older guy, Bill, and he came and worked with me, when I was working early one morning trying to work on fire. He just came here, try this, try scratching this part of the bark to make your tinder bundle. He just spent a little extra time because he loves that stuff and wants to pass it on.
Nice.
So yeah, no, it's really, like I said, it's a really supportive community, because I think it's a lot of, they understand that this is not natural for a lot of people have been so disconnected from these things that it's, can be intimidating. And so they are very nurturing in that sense of like helping you achieve. What was I also going to say? Oh yeah, there's it's cool is that this has been around so long that people bring their own expertise, and they focus on one aspect of it, like that guy. He actually has a YouTube. I'll plug his YouTube channel. It's called Fire Dojo, and it's spelled Phyre. So not fire, Fire. It's like dojo, but he is an expert at making fires without matches. Because, they teach us like two ways. There's like the hand drill and the bow drill that's a skill that we're going to have to work. But he's like, there's like a couple dozen different ways to do it. And he just kind of went over here's the different variables that can affect your outcome with a fire. And he listed like 20 variables. And he gave this information. This wasn't a part of the formal class. It just happened to be that he showed up in between. So there was like week 1, then there's a break of a day, and then week 2 starts up. And he just came in to check out the camp and see how everybody's doing. And I asked him a question. He's like, well, come over here. And he just started whiteboarding and showing me everything for like basically giving me a free, well, there's a couple other people showed up once they realized what was going on. But this guy was just super generous with his knowledge. And I'm like, dude, can I buy you a beer or something? Because he's like, no, just make sure you pass this knowledge on. That's what this is about.
Buy you a beer. How were you going to buy him a beer?
No, it was more of a figure of speech, like, can I do something for you? Because you're just giving me all this knowledge. And even though, I think Dwayne probably did want to try and like smuggle some beer in, but we didn't.
Absolutely.
But I'm trying to think there was one guy, Jorge, he was an older guy. And he had like a life crisis. His story, and that's the other thing, is all these people's life stories are kind of amazing. He grew up in Argentina, became a cook. I mean, it's a long story. Why he became a cook was actually interesting too, but he ultimately ended immigrating to the US, to the Hollywood area, and became like a chef to like famous people, I think. But he kind of lived like a wild party life, was my impression. But in his 30s, he was diagnosed with terminal cancer, or like very, very low risk surviving. And he kind of had one of those, God, you get me through this, I'm going to change my life kind of deals, like the foxhole prayer kind of things. And he made it through. He survived. And so one of the things he did to start changing his life is he decided, okay, I'm going to do this nature class and see what comes of it. And it made an impression on him, but he took his cooking skills and said, well, how did primitive people cook their food? And, there's all these different ways you can do rock boiling to boil water to, to cook. Like he cooked shrimp and other things for us and stuff. And there's like a whole bunch of different other ways.
What is rock boiling?
So if you need to heat up like water and you have a wood container, you can't put the wood container over a fire, let's say, because obviously it would catch. So what you want to do is like, if you've hollowed out a log or something, what you can do is put stones. So if you, let's say you have a fire going, you can put stones into a fire. And you want to make sure they're not stones that might be like from a riverbed or near water, because if there's water in them and you heat them up, they could explode. So like you want to make sure you get stones from like what would very likely be a long time dry area, and put them into the fire. And as they heat up, you kind of like you kind of fashion tongs. And the ideal setup is you have basically 2 troughs of water, one where you quickly drop the rock into the hot, like red hot rocks into water to wash off the charcoal and whatnot, dust on it. And then you pick it up from there and then you put it into the clean water. So you kind of rinse it off quickly and then you put it into the water. And so you put these hot rocks into your water, whatever you're using to hold water, and that eventually heats up the water and boils it. So it's a way of indirectly boiling water, and we saw him, they had like a big trough, like it almost looked like a horse trough of water. And he was doing that process and he actually got the water boiling, and then as the rocks cooled, he'd take those out and they would go back into the fire. But he was, basically boiling, I think it was shrimp. I don't remember what else he put in there. But he was showing how like that's how you can do it. That's just one way of primitive cooking. But he was like an expert in it. So I think it was like somewhere towards the end of that one of the weeks, he basically, did this huge demonstration of how to cook and kind of gave us a feast of like, this is how stuff can taste when you cook outdoors and native. But it was just, my point being is that each person kind of takes the foundation and then they expand into something that they're familiar with or they know, and they research it and become better at it. So that's another thing that's pretty cool, whether it's some guy who's an expert at fire or someone who knows how to cook. It's just interesting to see the community kind of now expanding and contributing back to this body of knowledge. So it's kind of cool to see that it's taken on a life of its own. I would say beyond the original instructor in a lot of ways. I mean, he's still there, and he would show up and he would give some lectures, but his teachers were, great too. I learned a lot from them. So
How old is this Brown, Tom Brown?
70, I believe. Yeah. So he's getting up there, and he was in some frail health. Actually, he been through some things. He had an accident where he hurt his back. I think he got COVID. So I had seen him 4 years ago, and he was robust. For an older man, he looked, fit and ready to go. Now he did not. He was struggling. So he's taken some health hits recently. I mean, hopefully he'll recover. But it's also something, if people are considering and they're aware of him and want to meet him, don't delay. Well, it's kind of like we talked about. Don't assume someone's going to be around forever. You don't know. If you want to learn from somebody, you got to make the time and effort. Don't hesitate on that, because you're not promised tomorrow. So I've been fortunate, to get to, be instructed directly from him. But I said the good news is he's definitely built up a level of instructors around him that, if someday he's not there, I think this can continue.
And where does he live? Well, I mean, like what state? You don't have to be specific.
I think, well, he's in New Jersey as well. So he lives not too far. So he owns, I think he owns or leases a huge amount of like wooded lands to run these courses. And I think he lives nearby there. So, he would come in, teach, and then head back. And so the instructors all lived on the campus while they were teaching. He did not. He would come in and out and kind of make like the celebrity appearance and teach something and go. But yeah, so, I mean, I know, Nico, you're interested in learning these things and stuff, and I would highly encourage you to try and make plans for it if you can. I know the summertime's tough for you with work, but
yeah, that sounds amazing, Joe. Hey, I'm interested to know, did they teach you guys anything like natural ways to deal with mosquitoes and insects, or is it just smoke pretty much?
And this is the kind of thing where I need to go back over notes, because I think they did talk about certain plants and things you could use that had like certain aromatic plants that you could use. I don't remember, honestly. So it was touched on.
What about in the army? In the army, do they teach you anything, Dwayne, about like if you're in the jungle and you got insects eating you alive? Is there anything you could do?
Yeah, well, we were issued bug repellent, right? But none of us trusted it, right? It worked, but who knew? We didn't know what was in it. We used to make fun of like it's probably like diesel fuel and depleted uranium and some other stuff or whatever, and it worked. But there's some stuff from Avon called Skin So Soft, right? And we used to try to track down Avon lady on the base or whatever and buy it from her. And I actually took some to New Jersey, and it still works. The mosquitoes I didn't get really very many mosquito bites or chigger bites or whatever. So
what if you're just caught with nothing? Can you just rub mud on your skin? I mean, is there anything that would work?
Yeah, not to my knowledge, but there's like, what was it, dog's bane, Joe? I think you can use that to help the bites, but I don't know about preventing the bites in the first place.
Yeah, I'd have to I don't remember. I know they touched on it, but off the top of my head, I can't remember. And I didn't get up so horribly, so I didn't use any bug repellent. And I don't know if it was just the ecosystem that they're in. So they're kind of in almost like a sandy, piney woodland area. I don't know how else to describe it. But in some ways, I've had more bug issues in my backyard than what I remember. Now, I did have a bunch of chigger bites. I mean, my legs still have, it looks somewhat like some constellations in the sky, if you look at my legs. But it wasn't horrible, like that was when, and a lot of people actually had a lot of tick anxiety. Like everybody's really stressed about ticks, but you got to keep checking. It's just part of the game. You got to be it's kind of the price of admission for going out into the woods. You are going to get bit up a little bit, and if you're by areas where there's stagnant water, there's probably going to be a lot more mosquitoes, so you've got to think. That's another thing about, as far as like when we're talking about gathering debris for, where you're going to try and sleep, is also where the location is. You can take that same debris pile, and if you put it where there's, moisture or whatever, you could be much more bit up by bugs than if you can get up to higher ground, or if there's going to be rain that night. So there's a lot of considerations like that.
Yeah, and going back to like the other thing that we learned in the Army, Nico, was like you just don't expose your skin. So that was like a contrast between Joe and I. Joe he was full out there, flip flops and shorts and short sleeve shirts. So I had long pants on, and if we were going in the woods, I would stick my pants in my socks or whatever, and I had shirts on or whatever. I tried to minimize the amount of skin that was exposed, but it was really hot, right? And so that just added to the miserable part. But yeah, so but yeah, so that's one way to not be bitten or whatever, right? Is to cover up or whatever. But then you just depending on the weather, right? You just doing the trade-off bites for just, I was wet all the time because the humidity was high, right? And we would hang the clothes out on the vine and get up in the morning, it's still damp or whatever. So yeah.
So what kind of stuff do they teach you, like how to track things? What are you looking for?
Oh man, well, that's a super deep topic, and they spend a lot. What's impressive is how technical it gets so fast. They've done a really good job of concisely teaching you, and what I would call like structuring it, or making it a system. So they convey a ton of information to you, like almost you can't digest it in some ways, but it's like, here's the world of tracking to you. I mean, so at the high level, they have what's called sign tracking, where you're not even necessarily looking at like the prints in the ground yet, but you're looking at like, where are there rabbit runs or deer runs like where are the disturbances in the foliage, where I can start to see, okay, an animal has been by this way. So you start to look at, or, has twigs been gnawed on or chewed, or is there any sign of fur, or scat or whatever. And so that's sign tracking, like indirectly looking for evidence of animal traffic. Then they start to talk about, okay, once you've found an animal run, now let's get into like, there's different ways to identify what you're tracking, the pattern, the overall shape of the shape of the print can tell you what family of animal it's in. And then if you can count the number of toes in the front and the hind legs, if you start to narrow into, okay, what is this animal? And also what is its pattern of walking? Like cats and foxes both do what they call direct registering, where their rear feet go right into the print of their front foot. So it almost looks like, it doesn't look like they have 4 feet. It looks like almost like a little human, where you're seeing like what you would think is 2 feet going left, right, but really it's 4 feet. They're just stepping right in their own tracks. But most animals do what are called indirect registers, where their rear leg comes around and steps either to the outside or the inside of the front foot. And so they get into like what does the pattern of their foot look like? They give you exercises to practice so you can start to tell the age of a track. So you kind of set up like an area like in your yard, and there's different like material you have to get practice. As I said, it's a whole, like you could spend hundreds of hours developing this skill set alone, where you just like kind of make marks in like wet sand over the course of a month, and you watch how that ages. So you can start to, and the more time you spend looking at these things, you start to get a feel for, okay, that track was made 24 hours ago, or that was made 12 hours ago, or this looks like, so, but they get into real minute detail of, if a person puts their weight down and they twist their foot, how does the dirt kick out when they do that? Are they, I mean, it gets you almost where you can't believe that they're getting at that level to do it, but that's what you have to do. I mean, to get really good at this. And also, like, they teach you how to measure. So I get an idea of what the straddle of your legs are, and then what your gait is, how far it is between steps. So there might be a place where you step where I can't see the track, but because I'm measuring it, I can say, well, it's naturally going to be, it has to be within this relative arc of where your next foot was. And so I might be able to do that to find where I find the next track. So like I said, it's very technical. That's just kind of like some of the details I can remember off the top of my head. Yeah, and like I said, they have classes just focused on that as well. But because it's kind of like part of their trademark, they definitely bring it on early, so you can kind of get an idea of what's involved. Actually, the story I was going to convey was kind of one of the life-changing stories. Again, was that I mentioned that instructor Bill, who taught us most of the tracking classes. And it was funny, he was picked to be the tracking class, but originally he said when he came to the survival school, whenever there was a tracking lecture, he'd blow it off. He had no interest in it. Like he'd go rest in his tent or whatever. He just thought it was BS. Like, why do I need to know how to track? I just need to know how to do, get a fire going, stomach. And so, but he kept moving forward, and eventually he was like, I think there was, I don't know if it was ironic or just kind of saying, hey, why don't you give this a shot? I want you to be able to teach tracking. If you're going to go any further in the school, I want you to know it well enough to teach it. And one of the things, he was a Marine. So his story is kind of cool. He went to the Navy Academy. He graduated from that and went to the Marines, and was an officer in the Marines. And while he was doing these Tom Brown classes, like whenever he had vacation, he would go and do these classes at the school. So he was still in the Marines doing this when he started to work on his tracking skills. And I think he was in the base in California, so he had access to a sand beach. But he smoothed out an area of sand and he's like, all right, if I'm going to have to start teaching this, I'm going to start going through and learning this. And he did several different kinds of walks. Like he did, okay, I'm going to do like a walk where I'm stalking, like if I'm hunting. I'm going to do like a slow stroll. I'm going to do the walk like I do when I walk at work, when I'm at the Marines, because it's kind of, and he hustled through there, and then he did like a full-on run through the sand. And he said, if you know anything about the Marines, he says it's all about, efficiency and speed. Like it's all about saving money and doing things as fast as you can. And he said when he stopped and looked at his tracks, he could not distinguish his hard walk, his work walk from his run. He was putting so much effort. And it kind of shocked him because he said he was like in his late 20s, like 26 or 27, but he'd come home from, his duties at the base and he'd be exhausted. And he realized that it basically changed his life. He realized, oh my God, I'm like running around all day. I'm burning myself out just at work because I can see it in my tracks. I can see that it's almost like I'm running all the time at work. I'm running from place to place to place. And he said that he was also planning some long, like month-long hike, through the wilderness where he was going to be like marching 30 days or 30 miles a day. And he was planning this vacation. And he said when he saw that, he completely scrapped it because he realized I'm just going to be like rushing through this. And I'm on to go like, a couple 100 miles and I'm not going to see anything because I'm rushing. He just realized his whole life was rushing around all in hard work. And he's burning himself out. And he eventually left the Corps. I don't think completely because of that, but he just realized, hey, why am I burning myself out like this? Why am I, but it gave him insight into how he was living his life just by looking at his tracks, which I thought was kind of fascinating.
Wow.
But yeah, the tracking thing is super cool. It seems like it's one of those things right now that it just seems like they've given you so much information, but I just have to put in the hours and times to try and get any kind of level of competency in it. I think it's going to be it's a long road for that. So definitely starting with just basically tracking myself in some sand and going over my notes and see how that goes.
Was there any way that they could I don't know, one of the guys, the instructor, the owner or the instructor, tell your wife to guide you to quicksand? So this is the kind of training, this is what I like. Not necessarily the outdoors, but this, deep, intense, training. I think, what was it? A few years ago, Joe, this is before we knew Nico, we were discussing doing a really in-depth, a 5-day seminar for people, right? Not just one person, but get 5 people to come out and train all of this, from just your basic stuff to your little sports stuff, but self-defense, weapons. Weren't we talking about that?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that because I really thought that this was an interesting, the way they do it, because the school doesn't run all the time. It's like, hey, you either go in May, well, COVID kind of messed it up, but in their normal year, they have a period where it's like these weeks you go through the standard class, and then they do it again later. You either come when it's there, or it's not, you don't get it. And so it's kind of like you get a standard curriculum and you're going to get the base curriculum, and we're going to run it May, the first week of May and maybe the first week of August. And that's it, and this is the standard class. And I thought that was a really interesting way of instead of being kind of open-ended, to saying people can know in advance. Let's say you publish that schedule in December, people can say, okay, I can plan to be there. I know this is going to be a 5-day, the fundamentals of the Cecchine method of self-defense. I will get that, at the end of this 5 days. And then they can take that information and run with it. but it's, it's not something where it's like open it. Well, I can do it whenever, like whenever I'm not sure on my schedule. No, you either do it at this week or it doesn't happen, And so like, if, however many people show up, it just seems like an interesting way to organize training. Yeah. And I thought that maybe we could do something like that, where it's like, yeah, we have there's 2 weeks out of the year where we'll do this, this is the fundamentals of the system. You can come for 5 days, crash. And then you just from morning to night, you're going to, we're going to pack you full of information. You got to take notes and then take it with you and see what you can develop with it. But it's a starting place for people who, or, whatever, if they want to be introduced to the system or train intensely. Yeah, it seems like a great way to organize teaching people things.
Yeah, we'll have to talk more about that. As long as I have help, I can't teach the whole class by myself all day long, but yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, that's, and I know there's other courses that have nothing to do with, martial arts or survival that, some, it could be a computer course or whatever, marketing courses or something like that. And I think COVID should have shown a lot of people that procrastination is not the way to go. If you're interested, you need to do it now, because it just may not be there, not because somebody died, but, businesses change. You really, that's what I tell people, like with the Tri-C program. I've had a few people ask me about it within the last couple of weeks, and I'm, I don't want to sound pushy, but I'm like, look, if you're interested, you have to sign up now. Not next year or whatever, because it honestly may not be available. It just may not. So, and I guess we all do that to a degree. We overanalyze, or we think, and then I remember many years ago, the Jazz Record Mart. You might have known about it, Joe. I think it used to be on Lincoln Avenue, and the old timer that owned it. And I went in there one time, and it was my first time in there, and him and I were just talking, And I don't remember what the album was. It's irrelevant, but I told him, I said, yeah, I wanted to buy this album before. I should have, and he's like, yeah. He says, now you'll probably never get that album again, or if you do, because it's out of print, you're going to pay quadruple. When you see something and you're thinking about it, don't overanalyze it. Just get it, right? So that's what I'm glad that you two guys were able to work this in your schedule and just do it, as opposed to contemplating. Sometimes it's just like, hey man, let's just do it. And you guys did, which is great.
Thank you. Yeah. And like I said, I've talked about this since I did it 4 years ago to dozens of people, and Dwayne was the only one really to actually go and pull the trigger on it, because I have a lot of not only my friends, but like Casey's friends and Ben's friends was like, you would love this. Trust me. This is your people, this community. This is what you're, I can just tell from hanging out with them. I know they would love it, but I mean, it's hard to commit to that. And you're right. And sometimes if you overthink it and yeah, I mean, think of all the things you might not do it. And that can be dangerous.
I used to tell guys when we're like, especially when I was younger, they wanted to know about, picking up girls, talking to them. I said, it's a balance. You have to know the right thing to say, but you also have to know when to shut up, because you can talk your way into something. And if you continue talking, you can talk your way out of it, right? You can blow it up. And that's the same here with this thinking and analyzing, even, to yourself. You'll think about it. You'll end up talking yourself out of it, or, time marches on and I'm good with not keeping in touch with people, right? And me, how many people in my life have died? It's extraordinary. And I sometimes have regrets because now I wasn't in touch with everybody. Okay. You lose touch, or you just, I'll do it tomorrow, or, they know I care about them. I don't need to call them today. And that's, that's a big flaw in me. I really need to keep in touch with people, because things can happen. They can either pass away or maybe move or change their number or this or that. You can't get a hold of them. So, yeah, I'm glad you guys did this. And the next time I see you, Joe, hopefully soon, so we can film some stuff for the membership site, you and I can talk more about this, over pizza or whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that'd be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to that. Yeah. And it's funny, I was thinking about you because I know you're such a city guy, even more so than me. I was like, man, how would Tony do out here? I kept trying to picture it. And it's first I was like, oh, he'd probably hate a lot of the stuff, but then I was thinking about, like, even you get something from it, like where you're living now. Like, I know you like being out on your porch and just being out and, looking at the lake. And I mean, so even a city guy like you, there's some aspect of the natural world that has a positive impact on you. I think that's just, even to the most, hardcore urban dude.
Well, it's the knowledge base. You're going to be gaining like really quality knowledge. There's something intoxicating about learning something that's at a world-class level. Okay. It's not some putz that's teaching you this. It's a cohort of guys that know what they're doing at the highest level. That in itself, is awesome. And I could probably relate with, like, my knowledge, and a lot of it is like, so I'll have the mindset, right? Because urban combat or urban survival and jungle survival, it's all about survival. But the difference is, I have the mindset. I'd be there for the skill set. How do I build the fire, or how do I make this, earthen tent or whatever, which I think would be like really cool. And, I'm all about improvised weapons, assessing a situation. You're at a bar, you're in a restaurant, you're wherever, and you have to quickly think of how to make a weapon. Well, it would be the same thing. The principles are all the same. How do I make I need to find, branches or whatever. So I think I would probably adapt it, maybe not as quick as others, but the mindset would be there. I would just have to get acclimated to, the climate more than anything, the surroundings.
And that's what I found too, is that, like, the first 48 hours, and granted, I've done this once before, so I kind of had an idea what I was getting into, but there was a certain point where I had adjusted, to, like, not having access to hot water, not having access, not sleeping on the tent or whatever. But within 48 to 72 hours, I was like, oh, this is the new normal. I could get used to it.
Yeah.
Like, I could go on. Now, granted, winter would come and it would change, obviously, but if everything's staying the same, I could keep going on like this. And I was thinking about, there are physical skills. And I think, like, in some ways, like, your knowledge of body mechanics, like how to position yourself to get the most leverage for when you're building a fire, things like that. Because your body it is a physical activity. And I do think there are probably going to be crossovers of, how you use your leverage and how you use your body mechanics to set up a submission is going to be, you can use that knowledge to translate, well, how can I most get the force I need, onto the spindle to get friction. Like, I could see those things coming quicker to you. And just knowing your body too, where, like, I can feel I'm putting my weight down here too much or too little. That sensitivity. So there is crossover even in that realm. I would think that certain things might come quicker than you imagine.
Yeah, it may, after, who knows, maybe somewhere. Now, I'm not procrastinating, but I can't just leave for 2 weeks because of my mother. Maybe that'd be something I'd look into down the line, or something similar. But yeah, no, I think. So I'm very science-based, that everything with me is really scientific, and you got to have the structure to everything. You got to know every little detail, and that's what this sounds like. That this is one of those detail-oriented things. So just for that, I would dig it. That to me, I can tell that it's like great training. There's a lot of great athletes out there that can't coach, right? They just do things out of rote memory, and it works for them. And sometimes it's hard for them to transmit that information. So while they may be good doers, let's say a pool player can, can they teach? And this group here sounds like not only are they doers, but they can teach. And so that's what you want when you're going someplace to learn. You don't want to have it be just an exhibition where the guy's showing off. Can he teach? And so this sounds like a winner. This program here to me sounds great.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I'm really happy to do it, and I hope to be doing more of it in the future. And, like, more people to come along, because, like I said, I think everybody could get something out of it for sure. And it is, to me, like a kind of a fundamental human skill, honestly. I mean, it's part of our, one of the things they said is like the natural world is our birthright, and you should feel at home there. Ideally, most of us have been removed because of the way society works or whatever. But ultimately, I mean, I agree with that perspective. That's
and the inverse of that, there's a lot of country bumpkins and rural, right? That especially living out here, they think that going to Chicago is like going to Afghanistan or something. They're afraid of the city, that this and that. And they could deal with a urban course, okay?
Yeah.
How to navigate streets, how to, this and that, how to, there is, because I always thought about years ago, back in the mid 2000s, like 2005 or six, I thought about that, about doing a course. Let's say you come out here for a weekend, 3 days or something, and I teach you how to go to, for example, a Polish nightclub, right, or whatever, where nobody's speaking English, right, or a roughneck part of town, or put us in tenuous circumstances, right, and just so your body feels it, and you get that true rush of adrenaline, and then you'll be safe because I'll be able to handle the deal. I thought that was pretty awesome, and then other things along that lines about really how to cope with the city, little tricks on how to get around in your automobile. And but the girl that I was with at that time, she's like, you guys aren't going to bars every night. No, this ain't happening. So all right, I didn't do it. But those are things too, because there's a lot of people that just don't, believe it or not, they have misinformation or fallacies or myths about big cities. And some of it's true, but most of it is, exaggerated. So that'd be cool to do.
And I think it is a perfect analogy, because just like people will miss out on the natural world because of fears or misunderstanding, you will miss out. I mean, the urban areas have a lot to offer. There's a lot of art and culture and wonderful things there, your fellow mankind. And if all you think about is the news headlines, and it keeps you out from missing those experiences. I mean, there's just so many different things to experience, in like a world-class city like Chicago, restaurants, you name it, the theater. But if you're just like, oh, I don't need that, or I'm afraid of it, or, so it's exactly complementary, if you know how to deal with it, where to go, then you won't miss out on those things. Why cheat yourself?
Well, teaching them awareness, a lot of people, that's a buzzword, right? I told you that ridiculous Navy SEAL video, you can say, well, you have to be aware. No, people don't know. What does that mean? How do you become aware? And these are skills that I know urban wise, not wilderness wise, of how to watch when you see a group maybe starting to develop. Okay. Because a lot of times you're not going to have a group of 4 people walking shoulder to shoulder, right? They may be, across the street. One is across the street. The other one's on the other side, or maybe one up in front, one up in back. You kind of have to be alert and watch if they're starting to swarm, and you're the prey. There's so many little subtleties like that. And again, you have to see this and realize, where can I duck out of this? Like Dwayne said earlier in this podcast about getting out of the situation completely. How do I do this? Right? Where do I go? One of the ridiculous things this Navy SEAL said was trying to recruit people to help you if you have to fight. Like you go into a store and now you're going to try to ask people, strangers, to help you fight. Okay, so you don't want to take advice from this guy, because that's, you can't bank on that, right? You just need to know how to escape, evade, and this is all military stuff, evasion and escape. That's part of it. And in an urban situation, there are things that you can do. Understanding, for example, alleys. If you're in Chicago, how you can maybe make an alley work for you, how an alley can work against you, how a store can work for you, how a store can work against you. So quickly, if you're in a building, if there's a bunch of deep-seated, deep buildings in Chicago, ducking into one of those, and they see you ducking in, if they're after you, you got to be able to, you got to come out eventually, right? So are there other options? The minute you're in that store, is there a back way out? Okay, take it if you can. What's the worst that's going to happen? The owner of the store is going to call the police. Well, that's not a bad thing, especially if you're getting stalked, right? So tricks like that, and there's many that I've learned through the years that I think would be cool. We're getting off the track, but anyway, I'm done.
I think you're onto something, Tony.
Well, nobody's doing it. Like I said, anybody can make a video claiming, titling it, I was an airborne ranger or on this or that. That's got nothing to do with urban in America and, and all of that jazz. And yeah, especially if you're a 130 pound, 120 pound woman, it doesn't matter. All of these strategies apply to if you're as giant as the Big Show, or if you're as small as, Billy Barty, they'll all work because it's not relying on any necessarily on your physical skills. It's on your mental skills here. And like Dwayne said, don't walk at a 45 looking down. Always look around and look around naturally. Get into the habit of it, and it's not paranoia anymore. Okay, if you're in the habit of always like looking around, seeing everything, become very observant. We've talked about this once before, how I could take somebody, I could go to their apartment or their house and take them into their back room, sit them down in their house and ask them, tell me everything that's in your living room, everything, every name of the book, if you have books, this, that, every knickknack, tell me. You know what? Most people cannot do that. They'll forget, because they take it for granted, right? In their own house, they're not even totally familiar with their surroundings. You can't be like that. You got to know where everything's at, because it develops, skill sets. And the quicker that you can analyze shit, boom, you're a winner. You're going to be safe no matter where you're at. Anyway, never mind. I'm done.
Well, no, we've gone, and this has been like good 90 minutes or so. And I think this is a good place to wrap up. Maybe I think that was a good observation. Dwayne, thanks for coming on and sharing your insights and Army stories. Hopefully we can have you back. I think that would be great. You're always welcome, of course.
Yeah, let's schedule it for a week after, right after the Ohio State Buckeyes beat Michigan.
Ha!
Which will be pretty much the time they play, right? So,
Oh, no. Well, we'll see. This is our year this year.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. Well, Tony, Nico, Joe, thanks for having me.
Oh, we hope to have you again. And yeah, Nico, I'm glad you were able to pop in.
Yeah, it was very cool.
It was great to meet you, Dwayne.
Nice. Same here, Nico.
All right, guys. I will see you guys all next week.
Yeah, have a good one, guys.
All right, guys.
Bye.
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 Bye.